So I will just introduce the webinar for the people. So welcome to our webinar session. Today, the presenters are Egal Attali, Yena Park, and Andrew Ranch from Duolingo. Maybe as you know, in the language testing field, change to test specification occur every 5 or 10 years. Usually it's a very slow process. And now what we are seeing is some kind of secondary innovation based on artificial intelligence and automation. And this is offering a new opportunity to rethink the way to deal with assessment and probably with many things, with what the people are doing in their daily job. So we will have the opportunity to explain this kind of processes. And I thank our presenters today for sharing their insights. And it's now time to give the floor to Yena, Egal, and Andrew.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. Happy to be here today. I will start and hand off to Yena, and Andrew will switch during the presentation. So as Vincent said, we are here today to describe the processes we use to develop and deploy improvements to our test. And of course, you may be wondering why we need rapid iteration on a language test. After all, language tests hardly change from one decade to the other. So you can imagine we think that language tests do need to change. The world has been changing dramatically in the last few years as a result of new technologies, and the new generation of language tests is needed to keep up with this changing world. In order to do that, we needed to develop the processes we will describe here today. Next slide. So to put things in context, our vision for a new generation of tests rests on several pillars. These include generative AI to support fully automated item generation for complex interactive task types that include feedback and scaffolded multi-phase tasks. Everything is automatically scored, so automated scoring considerations are an integral part of task development. An iterative evidence-based process for task development with extensive piloting and experimentation. And basically, this third pillar is the focus of this talk today. And lastly, a collaborative interdisciplinary approach where language testing experts, engineers, AI designers, and psychometricians work together. So here is just a bit of context about our test, the Duolingo English Test, the DET. It is a large-scale, high-stakes, digital-first English proficiency test. It is computer adaptive. It is very short, delivered online, remotely from anywhere. It is proctored by humans after test completion, and score turnaround is very short, less than 2 days. And we report an overall score and 4 swirl subscores. Okay, so to summarize the context of the talk today, we will focus on how we iterate, not so much on the products of these iterations. And I will pass it on to Yena now to dive deeper into the cycle of development.
All right, so just as sort of like a graphical illustration of how we do test development, it's like roughly divided into 3 stages. We start by identifying gaps, and we'll just briefly touch upon how we do that in the next slide. And then the middle part, the task specification. That's where we use technology to really iterate from going from sample writing items to experiment design, all the way through updating the task specifications based on our experiment results. And we'll talk about like the toolings and the systems that we have in place to support this iterative test development stage. And then lastly, we go to productionization, where we do the automated item generation, review, piloting, and scoring and scaling. Right. So how we kick off this cycle is we identify improvements both internally and like through internal and external evaluation. So we're the we're the ones to know best what's wrong with the test, I guess. So we do constant analyses, and based on our internal evaluations, we identify areas that we can make improvements on the test. And then we continuously hear feedback from our stakeholders. We have institutional partners that we work with, and then we go out to conferences and hang out with researchers where we will get like feedback about what's missing from our test. So we sort of triage all of these different avenues where we get feedback from, and then decide on whether we want to add a whole new task to the test or just make tweaks, sort of like an enhancement to what we already have existing tasks. So once we have what we want to do, once we roughly have an idea of what we want to do, either a whole new task or an enhancement to an existing task, we get right on to iterating. And we do that mostly through two things. The first tool sort of like that we have, sort of like the data collection platform, is the practice test. So this is a readiness platform on our website for all of our registered users / future test takers. And then you go onto this page, I think it's englishtest.duolingo.com/practice, where you can take free practice tests for however many times you desire. It's unlimited and free. And once you click the practice free button, it just replicates the full certified test experience from start to finish. You get to see all of the items as they would appear on the test, not the actual like operational items. These are practice test items, but like the experience is the same, and we get thousands of test takers on this platform every day. So the advantage of having this platform, the practice test, is not only that test takers get to practice on what they will be taking the actual test on, we can also get data from them by making tweaks to existing tasks that we have on the test. So we can test, like, let's say, like, let's take a C test, for instance, like the item type that we have. And we were like, okay, like we have this new batch of C test items. Do we want to see what they're like? And so we would be putting these new items onto the practice test and get data through that way. And that way we can sort of like get a rough estimate of what the items, like how the items perform based on a sample population that is pretty much 100% similar to our actual test taking population. And then we can also test stuff like administration algorithms, like how we tweak adaptive administration algorithms without really surfacing that difference to test takers from surfacing that difference between the practice test that they're taking right now and then the actual operational test. So the weakness, sort of like the limitation of the practice test, is we can really only test with what we have on the test. So we can test to our content, many things that we can do with the existing item types that we have, but we cannot test new tasks because that would be super confusing to test takers. They'll be like, okay, where is this new question type coming from? Like I have not seen this anywhere on the readiness material, on the test prep book, or on the actual test that I just took a day ago. So we do this by so we test new tasks through this platform, through this like separate but like included within the practice test platform called prototyping and experimentation platform, called PEP. So this prototyping and experimentation platform appears at the end of the practice test. And as soon as you're done with the practice test, this page opens up. It says, try one research-only question for extra practice. They won't affect your score. And this is an opt-in section. And about 45% of the test takers opt in. So we do get a lot of responses per day. And this is because this is not tied to the practice test and it's presented as like a separate opt-in section, research only section, we can really test anything that we want. Doesn't have to be an existing item type. It can be something completely new to the test. And we think that this consists of a fundamental shift towards really evidence-based test development. So sort of like the flow looks like this. So once they take the practice test, at the end of the practice test, they get this screen that you just saw. Try a research-only question. This is not going to affect your score. And then they can say no. At that point, they will get their practice test score. And if they say yes, they'll see like our experimental tasks. And then that's where we will be getting the data for all the way back here. This is where we do the task specification stage, where we get the data collection, the data for the data collection, data analysis from. Right. So it's the prototyping and experimentation platform pretty much acts. It is an experiment platform, so we can sort of like put whatever configurations that we want. We can specify what types of test takers that we want to serve this prototyping and experimentation platform too. We can specify the practice score ranges, country of residence, mostly IP addresses, through IP addresses. We can also specify, okay, how many repeat takes do we want from like a test taker? And we can also like select different conditions for test takers. Do we want them to always be administered? If they come back for the second PEP, do we want them to be in the same condition as they were in the first PP take versus a different condition? And then we can also specify how we want to serve up the items within each condition. Whether it's random or always fixed. So basically, just to show that the PP is just like an experiment platform, like Qualtrics or let me try. I think it was like just like Qualtrics, but very highly specific to our purpose with the sample population that I would say like emulates our target population, which is the certified test takers. And then these are the types of data that we can collect. We can collect just about anything, really. We can collect task-specific data like text and audio responses, different timestamps on when they did certain things, like how long it took for them to answer something, how long it took for them to click something, like time between stuff, anything really. And then interactions with UI elements, like did they scroll, did they click this button, how many times did they click this button, blah, blah, blah. And we can also collect survey data to get data from test takers on how they perceived the task, whether they had any technical issues or whether they were confused about anything. We can also get feedback on how pretty things are. And then we can also get data on test strategies and cognitive behavior, sort of like what was going through their mind when they were taking this test and what strategies that they were using. And we can also get process data like keystroke logs for writing tasks. We can also record their screens, and then we can also just record their entire mic, but of course with their permissions. We're not doing this like secretly behind the scenes. So just to show you like some of the sample studies that we did for operational and research purposes. So for like, take for instance, interactive listening, we just recently added listening comprehension questions. So we did a bunch of experimentations on things like the response format, whether we want to enable the replay function for the audio stimuli, the time limit. And then for when we were launching interactive listening back in 2023, we also experimented a lot with other things like the number of distractors, whether we want to allow test takers to replay, whether we want to show the entire conversation history or not. And then you're also able, because this is like this PEP is separate from the practice test, we can, like I said, we can like run whatever study that we want. We've also gotten we've also been able to get some data for research studies, like the impact of task duration on writing outcomes, which is now out in assessing writing. And then stuff like what will happen to test takers and the writing responses if we show them localized stimuli, which we presented in LTRC this year in Bangkok. So just to sort of show you as examples, so focusing on the response format. So this is before designers made it pretty. It's like really ugly. But on the left is basically the listening comprehension questions. You listen to like a passage, like a stimulus, and then answer comprehension questions about the listening stimulus. And we experimented with 2 different response formats. On the left is a free response format, and on the right is the gap fill format, where we sort of provide a little bit of like support for how constrained your answer needs to be. And then we found that the gap fill response format is faster, which is always to our advantage because our tests, we would like to ideally keep our tests as short as possible, and also slightly more discriminating. So so the blue dots, I think the blue dots are the red dots. I think the blue dots, sorry, ignore the red dots. I think the red dots are the conversation items.
Ignore the blue dots.
Ignore the blue dots, thank you. The red dots are the comprehension questions, so ignore the blue dots. The red dots on the y-axis is the gap fill response format. So these are like the same items, but given in like different response formats. So the y-axis is the gap fill response format, and then the x-axis is the free response format. And as you can see, the red dots are closer to like the y-axis, like the gap fill format, meaning for the item total correlations, meaning that they're more discriminating and that they're faster. All right, so that's why we opted to go with the free response format. And then we also tested whether we want to allow test takers to replay the audio stimuli. Yeah, like when they were answering the comprehension questions, like as you can see here. And we found that, again, the audio, sorry, this is like the same thing. The y-axis is the replays allowed, x-axis is no replays allowed. Ignore the blue dots, focus on the red dots. And the ability to replay audio scenarios while answering comprehension questions led to higher item total correlations and higher retest reliability. So that's why we decided to keep the replay function in our audio stimulus for this particular item type. So as you can see, the strengths of PP are that we are able to get data, like a large amount of data really fast for new tasks that are not on the test. And it allows us to just about do any kinds of experiments. And I guess the biggest advantage is that we are like these test takers often do go on to take the certified test, and they already have taken the practice test if they are in PP. So we can get links to their practice test score and certified test scores. So we have that sort of like we have that proficiency that we can go off of. And then since this is a separate, clearly distinct section from the practice test, it helps to prevent test taker confusion in that, oh, this is not a part of the actual operational test. But clearly they also come with limitations. They appear at the end of the practice test, which is already pretty like long. So there is potential test taker fatigue. And because it is not a real test, test takers don't try probably as hard as they would on the certified, like the operational test. So we do have the stakes effects that we need to take into consideration that could lead to lower effort responses. And then because, like I said, it appears at the end of the practice test, getting the repeater data could be fairly slow, but not as slow as it can be. All right, and then I'm gonna hand it off to Andrew to talk about how we productionize.
Okay, great. Thanks, Yana. So now we'll talk a little bit about how we go about productionizing new tasks. So when we have a new task that we want to put on the test, we need to come up with a few new processes to actually construct the item bank. So first of all, we need scalable automated content and item generation processes. This is one of the top things we think about when we're creating a new task, because this is a very large scale test, very high stakes. We need to be able to regularly refresh the item bank. So it's not sufficient for us to maybe just generate a few hundred items one time or a few dozen items and regularly refresh. We need to be able to regularly produce hundreds or thousands of items in the long term. So we need approaches to doing that that are going to scale with that in mind. Additionally, we of course want to be able to actually evaluate how well the generated items match the specifications and whether they're going to have any potential quality issues. We don't want to generate hundreds or thousands of items and then send them off to human reviewers and discover that there's actually major systemic problems with the ones we've created. And finally, every item that does go onto the test is reviewed through an extensive human review process. So we just need to update our procedures and give guidance to our reviewers to make sure that they understand what types of things to be on the lookout for, what considerations to be bringing into that process for a new task. So let's start by talking about the item generation side of things. So really, when we approach this is very much a collaboration between assessment experts and AI engineers. So the assessment experts will help to define the target properties of the content, for instance, reading passages or short conversations that we want to model within the generation processes themselves. So this could be things like the domain of the text, subject matter, certain types of stylistic markers or types of phrases and language use, and of course, general difficulty level. And then once they've kind of laid this out, the AI engineers are responsible for developing these scalable and modular processes that can generate very diverse content that actually represents those target attributes at massive scale. We also want to make sure that these processes are modular because we want to be able to potentially modify them to incorporate experts' feedback. So if we just built processes that generated items from scratch all in one go, that probably would actually be much harder to bring in expert feedback, because we might get feedback that, oh, the keys on these items are bad, but the distractors on these items are bad. And if it's one behemoth process, it's very difficult to actually figure out how to tweak it to accommodate that type of feedback. Similarly, when it comes to actually the items themselves and the tasks related to the content, the assessment experts will develop specifications and provide guidance on what types of things the items need to have or need not to have, and the AI engineers will operationalize those to create the automated item generation processes as well as the evaluation systems. So really, this is a highly collaborative process that really requires the expertise of both AI folks and assessment experts. So I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by scalable content, just because this may be not quite as obvious where the problem comes in here. So if you've poked around with LLMs a bunch, you might find that if you ask for, or what you would potentially find if you tried to ask for, say, a list of 15 ideas, is that that list of 15 ideas is probably going to be much more varied and interesting and diverse than if you were to ask for a list of 5 ideas 3 times. And this is just because LLMs tend to exhibit what I would call local diversity. They're very good at producing diverse outputs within a single request. But if you try to query them several times with the same set of inputs, you're going to start to see a lot of overlaps. And so this is something that we have to think about a lot when it comes to how we create content, because we need to be able to create processes where we only have to provide a few inputs, but we're able to get hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of very diverse and unique outputs. And so we have to sort of design these processes with that issue in mind. So the figure here on the right kind of shows how we approach this. For this is an example of how we would create potentially short dialogues for the interactive listening task that Jenna mentioned. We might provide just a short scenario describing the type of interaction that's happening between, say, a student and a professor about an upcoming assignment. And we would provide maybe an academic field, so physics. And these inputs would have been defined probably by our assessment experts. From there, we can then use this to construct plans for how these conversations should go, and we can leverage that local diversity that I was talking about with LLMs. So we could generate, say, 10 or 15 sets of potential additional details about this scenario in one call to the model. So what type of assignment is it? What course is it for? What's the specific topic? And then from each of those 15 sets of scenario details, we could then stick together the initial input and those details and say, okay, now generate 15 sets of character details. And we can keep doing this branching. And because we're changing the conditioning that goes into producing each step of this plan, it will produce some different outputs for each of the prior sets of inputs. And so ultimately we can end up with hundreds of very distinctive plans for how a conversation can go from one set of inputs. And then we can generate the actual conversation based on all of the details in that plan. So this is super helpful for minimizing the number of inputs that we have to handcraft while ensuring that we're able to scalably generate hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of conversations. The metadata that comes out of these plans can also actually be very useful for making sure that we are ultimately selecting a very diverse set of items to put into the bank. And it can be useful for actually evaluating the final content. We know what types of information and structure should have gone into that conversation. And so we can make sure that the details in the plan and the conversation actually align. So there's a lot of advantages to this approach. Once we have the content, and we're going to jump ahead a little bit and say that we also have some of our initial items, we need to find ways to evaluate them automatically. And so again, we build out extensive processes to do this. We try to incorporate well-known item writing practices and combine them with NLP and LLM-powered features to ensure that the generated items are free of obvious problems. So these would be things like we can use surface features to avoid very obvious answers or easily noticeable differences in the options. So things like option length. We want to make sure that the answer to a question is not just found in the text of the question itself, things like that. We can use embeddings produced by language models to check for potentially duplicate questions by comparing the cosine distance between the embedded question texts. We can also make sure that, say, options are comparably similar. We don't want two pairs of options that are highly overlapping and that test takers might be able to use to guess that neither of them is the right answer. We can also leverage the fact that LLMs can actually produce probability or estimates of the likelihood of a piece of text. So this is very useful for potentially finding an option that is maybe too likely to be a potential key out of a set of distractors, or maybe we can find questions or texts that are maybe oddly phrased. The likelihood of the passage looking like this is just very strange. It could indicate grammatical issues or logical inconsistencies. And then, of course, we can also actually build whole evaluators using LLMs. These can be used for any number of things I'm sure you can imagine, but things like checking answerability, evaluating whole sets of questions, very flexible, but of course need to construct evaluation sets to make sure that what they're predicting is actually useful. So once we have the items generated and evaluated, now we can send them off to human review, and this is where we get into kind of our platform for how we manage the human review process that we call the items factory. This system allows us to easily create review assignments for our human reviewers and distribute them and monitor the progress through that process for every item that ultimately goes on the test. The items factory allows us to track all of the changes made to the items, any labels applied or annotations provided by the reviewers, and comments, all of which can be used to improve the generation processes previously, as I mentioned. So just to give an idea of the general process that we follow for our item review, we start with an item quality review. This is where each of the items actually gets extensively reviewed and edited for just making sure that it adheres to kind of the structure of the item that we want, making sure that the distractors are high quality, making sure that the questions are useful and informative, things like that. Reviewers are able to fail items here for a number of reasons before they then go on to what we call fairness and bias review. So this process tries to make sure that our test content is suitable for a global audience. So we have test takers from around the world. So there's many issues that could come up that if we just had reviewers who are centered in North America, for instance, we might not realize that the content is not suitable for those audiences. So we have a diverse pool of reviewers. We go through 2 reviewers reviewing every item with a third adjudicating, and they'll flag items that potentially have content that's inappropriate for some test takers that may not be relevant to all test takers. So if we had a prompt that asked, what do you like to do for winter break? That's obviously not relevant in some parts of the world. And we also, of course, check for stereotypes. And then items that also have audio, we use TTS for all of our audio based on the Duolingo world characters. And so all of the audio that we generate for the content also goes through review to make sure that there's no pronunciation or intonation issues that would severely affect test takers' comprehension. And as I mentioned, every single part of this complex process is managed through the items factory, and there are a few advantages to us being able to do that as well. One is that we can provide extensive tooling to the reviewers to help support their revisions. So we can leverage tools that we actually developed for the item generation processes and surface those to the reviewers to try and help them with their revisions as well. Additionally, by going through this platform, we can offer continuous training, particularly for the fairness and bias guidelines, to make sure that our reviewers are adhering to our guidelines. So we have these calibration items that we call them, which are administered as part of the review process. The reviewers aren't aware that any item is particularly a calibration item. They just review it the normal way they would. And at the end, they're given kind of a summary of the label that we would have assigned and the potential failure reasons that we would have assigned, as well as an explanation for why. So this is very useful for ensuring that we maintain our guidelines and ensure a high quality bar. So now I'm going to actually hand this over to Yigal to talk about item piloting and productionization.
Thank you. So really quickly, the other aspects of productionization involve psychometric work of piloting, scoring, and scaling. This is a very complex process that can easily fill a whole presentation. Here, we just want to give you a sense of how we do it. The challenges are very significant. The first is that the DET is a very short test, and we simply do not have the luxury of having a separate pilot section administered to each test taker. In addition, the DET is an adaptive test, so response data is extremely sparse and also not representative. So the solution we developed is a sophisticated algorithm that fully embraces the uncertainty in item parameters. Parameters are never fully known. They are only estimated with a degree of uncertainty that depends on, among other things, pilot sample sizes. The other idea in SPICE, that's how we call it, relies on is that even in the absence of any data, we still may have some information on item parameters based on linguistic or NLP features of the items. These include word and text difficulty models, but can be much more complex for passage-based reading and listening comprehension items. The implication is that it is possible to launch new items with no data that still have item parameters, even though these would have relatively high uncertainty. Next slide. So this is what we call soft scoring. We integrate uncertainty in item parameters by sampling from possible values of parameters. The example shows ICC's, item characteristic curves. Each curve reflects a particular set of item parameters. The point estimate of these parameters is reflected in the single red line, but the point estimates do not take into account the uncertainty in parameters, which can be independent of the point estimates. If we sample possible values from this hypothetical distribution, we get the cloud of blue curves that you see here. They reflect the fact that the item on the left has less uncertainty in its parameters than the item on the right. The key is that in scoring, we would actually not use the red line. We would randomly sample one of the blue lines and use it instead. Next slide. Okay, so similar concepts apply in adaptive selection of items. In CAT, in computer adaptive testing, items are selected such that they maximize the information about test takers. In this example, you can see 3 items with their sampled values of difficulty in this discrimination. And even though item C has on average higher discrimination, the sampled values of item A may provide more information for a test taker with an ability estimate of 5.5. That's the vertical line. That's the current ability estimate. Next slide. So this is just a very quick overview of administration principles that take uncertainty into account, soft scoring, and adaptive administration. In terms of folding in a new task, we ensure that it is done while keeping a few important constraints that keep the scale from changing. These include that the overall score is equal to the average of the four SWOR skills, the overall and subscore distributions must be highly similar, and the overall and subscore distributions must not change significantly. We also built a pretty sophisticated monitoring system that we call Aqua that tracks and reports many validity-related metrics in real time. That is another tool that helps us monitor the quality of the test. And in conclusion, technological innovations over the last decade or even less have rapidly expanded what is possible in all fields and especially in assessment. And by embracing these innovations, we've been able to employ truly evidence-based test development practices, develop scalable automated item generation processes, and accelerate how we pilot new items tasks while maintaining score reliability, and finally deploy innovative, fully automated interactive tasks for the first time in large-scale, high-stakes language assessment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yigal, Andrew, and Yena. It was a very interesting presentation. I think that it's very clear that what you are doing is to retake what you have done during a lot of years with language testing and to improve it with automation and the new kind of tools that we have. I'm really happy to see what you're doing with soft scoring, because it's not usually what the people are doing. And it's a very good news, I think, to speak about Aladina mixed with LLM evaluators. Aladina can be the worst nightmare of item writer, you know. So it's very good to see that you are using that with AI. Before to give the floor to the people to ask questions, you have a section in Teams with question and answer, and you have to put your question here if you want to ask some question to our presenters. And I will just start with some questions. I think that it's very clear that what is happening is that you are rushing the process of your examinations, and you get more information, and the way to improve your work is better than before. But could you explain us how your candidates and your stakeholders interpret these changes in your examination? I find very positive what you're doing with your practice, because you're making aware your test taker that you have changes in your examination, which is very positive. But do you have an idea about what they think about these changes? Do they understand that has an improvement or not?
Well, I think university partners, like the admissions officers that we work with, are positive about these improvements that we make to the tasks, because these are like changes that they have been specifically asking for in the past years. So they react positively to them, but I think they prefer like the fewer changes that we make to the test, the more they prefer it, because I feel like the less changes are welcome for the admissions officers, but we do communicate to them that like nothing about the score interpretations, the score scales are changing, and that's all they really need to know. And for the test takers, I don't know.
Yeah, for test takers, we have not done specific data collections to find out how they feel about these changes, but we're very careful to inform test takers about changes, upcoming changes very far in advance to make sure that they can plan and make decisions about which version of the test they ultimately want to take. So I think we start showing a banner on the website about 2 months in advance of any major overhauls to the test. So that gives test takers plenty of time to sort of decide what they want to do. And in practice, we generally find that while some test takers do take the practice test many times over a long period, the vast majority of test takers take the practice test and then the certified test within relatively short order. So we also try to time our launches to be mindful of the admissions cycle. So that way, test takers who are trying to take the test on a very near-term deadline for an admissions purpose aren't going to suddenly discover that the test has changed overnight.
Thank you, Andrew. Probably I think that it's not only a question for Duolingo. It should be a question for the field in language testing in the future to better understand how our candidates interpret this improvement, the change of paces in the innovation, because it's really what is happening. And, you know, it's happened for your smartphone. I'm not sure, but because of the pace of the changes, the people don't understand really what is happening with that smartphone. And probably if we start to do that with our examination, we will face this totally new issue, because it was not the case until now. Again, in a lot of examinations, you're making changes after a round of 20 years. Okay, my proposal is to follow with the questions of the people, of the attendees. Okay, I will try to. Okay, in the item factory, do the internal human item reviewers review every single new automatically generated item before the item go into the item bank?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we have an excellent assessment expert who manages this process very well, and she staggers these things because we do have different pools of people who are reviewing for these different tasks. So we can kind of have a continual process of some items are going through this quality review, some are going through this fairness and bias review, and sort of keep that wheel of item review going. But yes.
Not only every item, but every piece of content, which is sometimes not even an item. It can be a passage, a conversation, a rubric for our interactive speaking tasks. So yeah. And of course, as Andrew said, the audio itself also, in addition.
Yeah. And I mean, it is a lot of work and it is a lot of time spent, but it's significantly better than fully human writing these items in the first place. Just we've done some comparisons of the time and output, and it's miles better.
And do you have a procedure to assess the quality of the work of the item reviewer?
We do. The assessment expert who manages this process also goes through and extensively we'll go through. She has a couple of other people she'll work with to basically review the work of the existing item reviewers and make sure that there aren't any problems, especially for more newly hired people. We'll go through some more reviews with them, but we have several people that are pretty trusted at this point, who require a little less oversight.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and on average, how long does it take for an item to go through generation, review, and pilot testing on the PEP platform?
I think it depends on like what type of an item it is. But for like the shortest one, maybe dictation. No, that one is audio review. What would?
Yeah, so just to be clear, so the PEP platform, I saw another question in the other chat. We don't put any items that are going to go onto the actual operational test through the PEP platform. That we pretty much exclusively use for testing new types of tasks. And so we'll use small pools of example items to sort of validate the design and the way that we're scoring and grading the task and all of these types of questions that Jenna talked about. In terms of actually generating, reviewing, and piloting for items that go onto the operational test, yeah, that is highly dependent on the complexity of the item. I'm afraid I don't have a good answer off the top of my head. It's probably a couple of months.
Yeah.
In the shortest case.
Yeah. And like, yeah, maybe to go piggyback on like the first part of Andrew's response, like it takes us very like a short amount of time to get data on the PEP platform, because we're working with like only a handful of very like high quality, most like manually written items, sample items for the purpose of testing out various task features. So it could take us short as 2 days to get data on the PEP platform, like a week if we want repeater data. Really depends. But yeah.
But as far as like go ahead, Hugo.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that this is a huge amount of data. Every point in, if you remember Jenna's slide graph with results, every point is one item with hundreds of test takers. It's immense amount of data in just a few days. And we basically run these experiments and pilots maybe every week.
Yeah, and for several months to inform new task designs.
Yeah, so it's not just about the number of weeks you need to produce an item, it's the amounts of data that you are collecting during these weeks. So it's not only because it's quick, it's because it's big.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you talk a bit more about your assessment expert and your AI engineers work together? Because it's something very interesting, I think.
What would you like to know more about it?
We actually work together. We sit together.
We sit together, we talk to each other a lot.
We sit in one small space, open space. We just work together, which I have worked in this field for a very long time. This is very different from what I have been used to. So this is truly collaborative work. And I think it is very, very important. It is one of the really pillars of our ability to innovate.
So what you mean is that both of them are teaching them, so you have some feedback from the item writers and the engineers are getting some feedback for the expert assessment?
Yeah.
Yes, we actually work together to develop a prototype or an idea of a task type, and to work through it through iteration, data collections, pilots that may change our perception of what's the best thing to do, and we just develop it together. Engineers, AI, assessment people, psychometric considerations, all of this is done together with the same people in one group, one small group.
Okay.
Maybe just to give an illustrative example, like there's this like thing that we're working on, and like AI research engineers will show us the prompt that they wrote to generate like a sample of items, and then we'll be looking at the items together and then making changes to the prompts together to make sure that the output reflects, like the output is closer to what the assessment experts envision. So that's just like one example of how we work together.
Everyone will collaborate on like copy used in instructions, on layouts of the task design, because everybody is bringing in, many people on our team have taken these types of tests to get into their own graduate studies. And so they know where their points of confusion are going to come in. And so everybody chips in and provides that input and perspective.
Mm-hmm. And thank you. And another question with something very different. It's about your external frameworks, such as the CFR. You're linked to the CFR?
How do you align to external frameworks such as the CFR? Yes.
We use like descriptors from the CFR manuals in our prompts. Like we use language from the manuals to help inform like the differences in the difficulty that we build into the items. In terms of test alignment,
we have done standard studies.
We work with like external organizations to do standard setting studies. I don't know if that's what you were asking about though.
None of us have been extensively involved in that specific work, but
I think that it was the question, but okay. Wait. I don't know if we have a last question from the attendees.
Oh wait, no, I think we're missing like a couple more that were asked a while ago. Nanda is asking
on process data.
Yeah, how we use the process data. Yigal, do you want to take it?
One other very exciting type of process data is keystroke analysis, key logging. This is something that we used in one of the research studies that was mentioned about writing duration, short versus long, and we use it in other ways too.
And also to answer Erica's question about how we can use these, how we can like iterate rapidly in local settings, like I can empathize because I was also a developer in a local setting. And I think we can probably make use of the language classes that we have at universities. I feel like that's where you can do rapid iterations, like English writing classes, and then like second language, like L2 English classes. That's where we did most of our like prototyping and piloting. So I'd say to make use of those populations.
Probably the difference with a very local setting is that you have this kind of very huge data to deal with. So that's why you're in position to change your specification quickly because you have the data to do that. And usually it's not so easy to do that in a very local setting or a classroom, for example. Okay, so I think that it's the end of this webinar. So thank you very much to three of you. I think that it was really very appreciated from the people. And for our attendees, we probably have another webinar next year, probably before the next summer. Okay, so thank you very much, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.